Accessibility ain't just for those with disabilities. Makes the world better for everyone, online as well as in person. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the blind blogger Maxwell Ivy, and this is the Accessibility Advantage, where it is my goal to advocate for more accessibility for and inclusion of people with disabilities by emphasizing the many positive benefits that come from including people with many challenges like I have. You can find me at theaccessibilityadvantage.com. You can send an email to Maxwell at theaccessibilityadvantage.com. My primary social media network is LinkedIn, where it's Maxwell Ivy, and Ivy is Ivey. And if you are ready to learn more about if you're ready to learn more about accessibility and how it may apply to or impact your company, I do hope you reach out to me. So today, I'm going to be speaking with Daniel Jalcut, and he is the founder of Red Sweater, which you can find at redsweater.com. And he is the developer of a couple of my favorite pieces of software, accessible software. And he started his career in Apple in the late '90s as a software developer. He started his own company about 2002, and he really did not focus on creating things that were accessible. He focused on using standard frameworks to generate things that would benefit as many people as possible. And he was told how these products he was making were more accessible. People showed their appreciation, which is something I tell business owners all the time is out here. And so he's moved to making his stuff even more accessible than it already was. So you can find Daniel at redsweater.com. Daniel, thanks for coming on the podcast and welcome to the Accessibility Advantage.
Thanks so much for having me, Max. I'm excited to talk to you about my apps, of course, and in general, accessibility among all Mac apps, iOS apps, the whole world of apps.
That's something we'll have to talk about before we're through, is because there does seem to be almost like an invisible world of Android apps for people, especially with vision loss.
I don't know that much about Android, so that is, to be honest, not surprising. But yeah, I guess that's just not. I've always been stuck in the Apple ecosystems, and I think I have it right that historically Apple has been fairly sensitive to needs of accessible people, of accessibility for people. So I'm not surprised if people who end up discovering my apps are on the Mac or on the iOS to begin with.
Right. Well, we do represent a very large share of a very large percentage of users with vision loss are Mac users, mainly because of the longer time with the availability of the accessibility features. So, tell me a little bit of what it was like to work at Apple in the '90s, and then some of the things about starting your own company.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I joined Apple as a full-time employee in 1996, which was um, actually just a few months before Steve Jobs came back to Apple. So I was there at a really interesting time, an eventful time in the sense that when I joined, I was kind of lucky I got hired because everyone was saying the company was going out of business, if you can believe it. And at that time, they'd been losing money for so many consecutive quarters that they finally kind of cooked the books, I think, to have a $30 million profitable quarter, and they celebrated. So went from that to, and at that time I was working on the System 7. System 7.6 was the first operating system release I worked on. I was working in the, kind of the deep guts of the operating system for the classic Mac, and I followed Apple. Stayed there through the first couple releases of Mac OS 10. And I like to joke, Mac OS 10.2, I thought, well, this is pretty well done. So I guess I'll just go do something else with my life. But of course, there was so much more to do. And I had no idea, of course, that things like the iPhone, iPad, etc. Even when I left. It was about right when the iPod first started coming out. So obviously, Apple has had a lot of tricks up its sleeves over the years, and I was just kind of glad I got a really good fundamental basis in, I think, to connect it with accessibility. I think anybody who worked at Apple in the early days, especially, and even still to this day, I think, got kind of like a free education in usability in general. And usability in general, as you've alluded to, obviously is accessibility. So I think having the sensitivity that things should work a certain way and that actually simplicity is better than complexity. Those were like kind of like basic ideas I got from working at Apple in the 90s.
Right. And when we're talking about the version 10, that was really the beginning of the built-in accessibility features of voiceover, screen magnification, and other options. My first experience with accessibility from Apple was with the iPod Nano 4, which was the first thing I had ever had. It was a computer that had speech available on it. And you had to hook it up to a desktop or laptop to install the accessibility stuff. But once you did, you could use it pretty much totally independently without any sighted assistance, which, you know, uh, back then was just an amazing thing to people like me.
I bet it was. And you said that Mac OS 10 was the kind of the onset of the great accessibility features we, I guess, take for granted now. But just to give you an idea of how I wasn't really tuned into accessibility back then. So if you would have asked me, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that there wasn't the level of accessibility on the classic Mac, or that there was on the earliest Mac OS 10 releases. So it's kind of just been like, I have to give Apple credit just having it there, I guess, for as long as I can remember, definitely makes it so it's something that it doesn't feel like a flash in the pan. Sometimes the developers, we are hesitant to support things if we think Apple's just on a whim, right? So
Oh yeah,
that doesn't seem like accessibility features are going anywhere, and they have changed over the years. I've been working with them enough for long enough to see them change, but the fundamentals for the Mac, at least, are really pretty similar to how they were way back when I started looking at it.
right. So I don't want to make anybody angry at me. I'm not a real big historian either. I can't tell you if 10 was absolutely the first time, but
No, yeah, okay.
it's what I remember as the first time. And we do have to give Steve Jobs credit for seeing the aging out of our population to the point where he saw the value of accessibility beyond its benefit to people who are, quote, disabled.
Yeah, well, if he was the one to we obviously, you and I need fact checkers on this
Yes, we
podcast.
do. Yes, we do.
But if he was the one, or if he was among the people, at least under his leadership, it certainly expanded quite a bit. So definitely kudos to him.
Yeah, in fact, if you want to be the fact checker, if you want to do some history with me of adaptive technology, I'm more than happy to do that. Just hit me up on LinkedIn or send me an email, and we'll make that happen. Because my goal for the podcast is daily content, and I'm always looking for new guests. So, um, it's one thing you mentioned is that you learned that basic simple code is often the best way to create new products for computer users or app users, and that it sounds like you learned that during your time with Apple. Could you explain a little bit about how that went into developing the programs that you've done on your own?
Yeah, well, the main thing is to think every time you have the. So when I say simplicity is better than complexity, I mostly meant that not in terms of the code itself, although that can certainly help, but mainly in terms of the interface. So even for a sighted user, you might think, somebody who's designing software might think, okay, for a sighted user, putting all the options on one screen, like 50 buttons that each have a different thing they'll do, is a good way to design it, because a sighted user can scan the whole thing rapidly and click the thing they want, but that kind of design is too complex for anybody to kind of grapple with. So just the idea of kind of, there's these terms like progressive disclosure, which is kind of the idea of like the iPhone going from, one screen down to deeper levels of information. The idea that anything that only a very few number of users would ever want to do should not be like front and center on the app's surface. So, I like to think sometimes about like I have a coffee maker that is super accessible because it has one switch. It has the switch to make coffee and the switch to not make coffee.
I think we may have the same machine.
Yeah, well, I love this kind of stuff because what that represents is similar to a software developer asking the question, first of all, what do we want to do? We want to make coffee. Second, what's the most important thing to make coffee? Hot water. What do we need to make hot water? Well, we can't just be making hot water all the time, so we need a switch. Now, you make the decision to put the first button. That's equivalent to putting the first button on your app. Then the next question you ask, somebody says, hey, I want this to automatically make me coffee at 6 in the morning. Well, we're going to have to talk about that. Now, one kind of developer would say, no problem, putting a fully programmable keypad on the front of this coffee maker. Another developer might say, okay, I see why that is a valuable thing, but I want to make sure I can serve you without making the simple experience for everybody else too complicated. That's kind of the mantra of being conscientious about the things you're doing in your apps. And it's often, the downside of it is it does slow you down as a developer. You can imagine how the fastest way to develop software is just to simply add another button, add another button, add another button, add another button. Because that doesn't take any time of like working through the different designs and seeing how it will feel. So it's really kind of the trade-off is I have to say no to a lot of people who ask me for specific features, not because I don't think the feature is good, but to use that metaphor again of the coffee maker, because I haven't figured out yet how to make the coffee timer start at 6 a.m. without making it difficult to start the thing when you want to.
Right. And I'm going to have to learn that term you shared just a few minutes ago about the iPhone, the thing about, the features that are least likely to be used are put in lower and lower tiers. I'll have to learn that expression from you because I want to use that the next time I have a conversation with a software developer whose product has like five times the features that I or most people I know would ever need to use.
Yes. Well, that's a good phrase because you can give it to them. I'll say it again, progressive disclosure. I just Googled it myself to make sure I wasn't making it up. I'm not making it up. And it says, I'll just read real brief. It says it's an interaction design pattern used to make applications easier to learn and less error prone. It does so by deferring some advanced or rarely used features to a secondary screen. So it's actually, I was more right on the target than I thought I was, but that is basically the idea is, you've seen this, you see this too, in electronics, you often have, like at least in the older days, I remember we had like a VCR when I was growing up. So VCR, for folks who are too young to know, is like a tape you could record video to, as opposed to using something like TiVo or any other streaming box. And what they would do is they'd have a nice simple interface, and it would be like play, stop, rewind, fast forward, record. And then there'd be a little door on the front of the VCR. It was smooth, nice smooth door that you would open up, and there would be about 50 buttons inside this little door. So you had, it wasn't the greatest design, but it was at least anybody on a day-to-day basis can have the nice, simple interface. If you want to do anything else, you have to go through the nightmare interface. But at least that was, again, a kind of example of progressive disclosure.
Okay, I'm gonna have to commit that term to my memory because it sounds like something that will be very helpful in having discussions with developers in the future. And that's progressive. What again?
Progressive disclosure. So,
Disclosure. Progressive
yep.
disclosure. All right.
So we're not disclosing everything to the user all at once. Kind of like the famous, Microsoft Word, like 3 rows of buttons at the top of the window. Um, having that's another example. Having the discipline to have only 1 row of buttons at the top of your window. Um, that's another example of a constraint that actually causes you to think through and to make software more accessible because um, it forces you to think about the hierarchy of, not information, in this case, the hierarchy of tasks that people might want to do.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is it forces you to think, it forces you to say no, but it also forces you to develop better user experiences for people because you're focusing on the majority of people who will use a particular piece of software or an app and what they will want and need on a regular basis.
That's exactly it. And the funny thing is about being a designer of any product, I bet, is people when you're most successful, people don't even know that you did a good job because you never went to use your one switch coffee maker and said, "Darn, I'm sure glad that they only put one switch on here." You just think, "Well, this is the way it's supposed to work. This is how it's supposed to be." Light switch, similar example. You only notice the problems if the person made it too complicated. You don't usually notice when something in life just makes your life less complicated.
Right. It's the old line about the offensive linemen in football. The only time they're noticed is when they get a penalty called on them. The rest of the time
Yeah,
they should be invisible.
that sounds right. Yeah.
And I when as I'm hearing you talk about light switch as an example, I'm thinking about how there were some people who would want the ability uh, to have different levels of brightness in their light, and that would require a whole additional level of engineering in order to make that possible.
That's right.
Without,
Yeah. And for some people, those more fancy switches, they literally can't figure out how to turn the light switch off and on, because some of them you have to swipe your finger across it. There's, no tactile feedback or anything. Anyway, I obviously I like metaphors and I like thinking about, kind of the universal. I have this book. This is another great reference for anybody who's interested in this kind of stuff.
okay,
I think it's called Universal Principles of Design, and it's sort of just like about, yeah, it draws your attention to things like the coffee maker button, or how do door handles work, right? How does a door knob work? How do you know whether to push or to pull on a door? These kinds of things are really, I know I'm here to talk about Mac software, but
we'll get there. We'll get
yeah,
there. Don't
these
worry
kinds
about
of
it.
things are relevant, and maybe more importantly, this is a way for, I think, non-technical listeners or viewers, if you have them, this is a way for you to more closely appreciate the details of software design because you probably don't have as intuitive a sense of software design as you do for how the things in your everyday life should work. And so if you think about how, I mean, especially if there's people with vision impairments who I'm sure have to work with doors by feel, if you know that there's certain ways that that works and certain ways that that doesn't work, you probably know it really well. And that's the kind of way that somebody developing software gets to know whether a certain interface is working well or not.
Right, right. And I appreciate your metaphors because one of the big problems we have with getting people to embrace accessibility is just the unfamiliar territory and the overwhelm that comes with learning something new that many don't have any experience with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's been, like I said, you alluded to it, but it's just been a slow sometimes slow, sometimes faster evolution for me over many, many years, to the point where, I probably started not knowing anything about accessibility, gradually graduated to thinking of it as something I do for my apps to help specific other people. I'm going to do this specifically for people with vision impairment, or this is specifically for people, who, I don't know, can't hear it. Thinking of it all as others, right? And then you sort of gradually, I think this happens also because of aging, because most of us start to develop some forms of impairment that at least help us relate to people who might have a more severe version of it. So everyone I know, I turned 50 this year, everyone I know is starting to appreciate the larger font sizes that you can set on an iPhone, for example.
Right. Yeah.
And so the evolution is to go from thinking, I don't know anything about this, to this is something I do for others, to this is something I do for others, but I kind of appreciate some of it, to this is something I do for everybody, because there's no single person in the world whose needs are exactly the same as every other person in the world. So you can look at things like even that description I had of the 50 button array. There's some people out there, whatever reason, their brains just work in a way, they're going to look at that 50 button array and they're going to think, this is no problem. I got this. Right.
Yes.
But the fact is, we have to accommodate everybody, and the basic principles of visual UI design have been accommodating people who appreciate sort of like aesthetic, alignment, symmetry, color balance. We could imagine a world where all of those people were not being tended to, right? And then suddenly someone came along and said, wait, we have to look out for the people who like color balances, imagine
Wow.
if 90% of the world was blind and 10% had this weird sensitivity to light. And we're saying, well, shouldn't we make the software kind of like for those people who can't avoid the light getting to their, brain, make it look nice? And that would be the counter conversation, but very similar to what we're having now.
That's a very interesting way of approaching it. And if I said something like that, people I know would go, Max, you've got too much time on your hand if you're thinking these kinds of thoughts. And I'm not criticizing or nothing. I'm just throwing that out there because that's what they would tell me.
To be honest with you, I think on my feet a lot. And I love doing shows like this because I think of things I never explicitly thought about before. That's not something I've been wasting any time or spending any time thinking about, but it's just sort of goes in hand with the idea that we've both agreed on offline, that accessibility is for everybody. And sometimes I think going to those maybe sort of extreme examples just helps. Some people out there are not going to get it unless you go to a more extreme example that drives it home.
Right. And I think there's even a debate strategy where you take an argument to its extreme, even if the extreme is nonsensical, in order to make a point. So,
yeah.
But yeah, we both agree that accessibility features are for everybody, that, they not only benefit somebody who needs the feature, but quite often those features can be beneficial to others. Like, you pretty much can't go anywhere anymore without finding dark mode, which is one of those things that I remember back when I had enough vision to read in large print, So accessibility is for everyone. And I am glad we agree on that, because I've been using your products probably about 15 years now, at least Mars.
Whoa. Okay. Well, I like to hear that.
I've actually bought it twice because the computer that I replaced the computer with wouldn't allow me to just reinstall it. It told me I had to start over. But the cool thing is whenever I go to a new computer, I just enter my login credentials with Mars Edit. It has all my past stuff and all the stuff I was working on. And, the really cool things about Mars Edit, for those who've never heard about it before, is one, it allows you to work offline. You can do just about everything you need to do for a blog post or a page creation without having internet access. And when you get internet access, you just tell it to upload the stuff. So that's a big one, especially for our nomadic entrepreneurs out there who sometimes not only don't have internet, sometimes they don't have electricity or water either,
Yeah.
So
well,
that's
at some point I
that's
can't help. Yeah. At some point I can't help with the electricity. You're going to need electricity to run Mars Edit, but
eventually, yes, eventually.
yeah.
But with the new batteries, you can go a long time between
It's true.
charges. So, but the other thing is while WordPress has been fairly accessible over the years, it allowed me to do a lot of the maintenance on my websites because I was using WordPress as a static representative of a web page. It allowed me to do a lot of that without having to go into the back end of WordPress and, chase myself round and round in circles trying to figure out how do I make it do this. And then instead I could just go into Mars Edit and go, okay, well, it's very simple to do that. And then I'll just let Mars Edit hash this out with WordPress when I'm through. And so that's one of those things that, like I say, the simplicity of it, especially for people who maybe are not really tech people, but they don't have the funds or the trust to let somebody manage their website or their blog for them on the back end. These are things that are very important. And they were really important to me because in the early days, I didn't have the money to hire anybody. My first website I started in 2007. So back then I had to teach myself to code HTML. I will preface by saying I was never really good at it, but I could do it well enough to make my websites run before moving to WordPress in 2012. But without Mars Edit, man, I'd have really been lost because
well, that's
I was
great
doing
to
it
hear.
all myself. I was doing it all myself. So every extra minute or half hour or hour that it took me to do something for the blog or the website was time I didn't have to recruit clients and promote available equipment and do the other things I needed to be doing. And so I've been wanting to get you on one of my podcasts for a long time just to show my appreciation and let you know how much having your product helped me personally and how much I believe it's helped a lot of other people out there with vision loss become successful online entrepreneurs.
I love to hear that. And I mentioned to you also offline that that's one of the things that's helped over the years is just hearing from people who are profoundly affected by accessibility features in not just my apps, but other apps. We need to hear that. So don't be quiet about it. If you're having that kind of experience with an app, I know you have plenty of experiences with apps that don't give you that result. I guess
Yes, I do.
I'm kind of asking everybody to, if you have an app that's kind of like the one button coffee maker for you, go ahead and let the developer know that you appreciate it because it's only going to make them want to do more to make it universally accessible.
It's a great point. I talk a lot about how when people make the effort to make their products accessible, that the community will generally support them because so few people are making the effort. But I forgot about the most important part, and that is supporting the developer and their team and giving them the emotional reinforcement and the information they need to continue making something more accessible.
Absolutely, especially for those of us who aren't constantly using the accessible features of the app. It kind of, to use an apt comparison, it kind of becomes invisible to us. It's there for people who turn on voiceover. But a lot of the time, it's just invisible to me. And it's great to know that sometimes people they'll write to me and they say, I love how accessible this particular part of your app is. And I'll be like, oh, that part is accessible. That's good.
No. It's just a testament to the fact that you have developed a habit, a framework, a process that results in more accessible apps and software to where you are creating some of these things. You just don't realize you're doing it. I'm known for saying, if you don't ask, they can't say yes. Well, I spent so much of my time asking people for information or opportunities, or even sometimes for emotional support, that sometimes I ask people for stuff I don't even realize I asked them.
Yeah. Well, that's a good, like you said, that's a good habit to have. And you're right. Once you have a habit, it becomes something you don't even have to tend to. So I'm sure that yeah, I constantly make omissions and mistakes with accessibility in my apps, but there's probably a lot of mistakes that aren't made because of that, some of those habits.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. We have to help larger companies, companies with bigger pockets that aren't able to do this. We have to help them understand how to create these habits, how to develop these teams. And I'm wondering if that's something that's going to have to start in the education system, whether we're talking formal education or people who are learning their craft through online content. Is that where we have to go, or is there some other way we can encourage more people to make this their habit?
I'm not sure. I think, like I said, a lot of it for me has been the positive feedback. That only works for me because I value something other than money in life, you know? So
Mhm.
for anybody who can look at the state of accessibility in their app and just say to themselves, well, the profits aren't the greatest in that. That's not where my shortest path to profits. They're probably not going to prioritize it anytime soon. So I think the reason you've noticed, and a lot of the most accessible and usable apps are from like smaller companies, or even like my situation. I'm a one person company, and it's because we have the freedom to be sort of more less money focused, because we don't have to explain to a board or stockholders why we're doing something. Um, and I think Apple is actually a pretty good exception in that point, because on that level, um, there was a good quote from Tim Cook several years ago where some shareholder asked him kind of challengingly about the accessibility of accessible features in the Mac or iOS. I can't remember what it was, and he had a very forceful reply, which was something along the lines, "I don't give a damn about the bottom line when it comes to this kind of stuff," you know. And we need more like leaders who are willing to say that. And the flip side of that, though, um, especially I think for smaller companies, it can be positive for your bottom line because, like you said, there's a kind of a niche accessibility community. Word gets around when an app is good and it has accessible interfaces. So I think it's more. There's more of a market there. There's more of a return on investment than some people think, especially when companies like Apple make it so relatively easy to make the apps accessible with framework features. So I think, getting to the bottom of my point, I think we need not to have like better education per se, not to like build it into the culture per se. The surest way is to make it financially lucrative for people to make their apps accessible. And I think it's possible. I think that there is a point at which the framework makers, the platform designers, Apple, Android, Google, whatever, can make it so that you know you spend $1 and you get back $2, because the time you put into making your app accessible opens you up to enough new customers that it actually pays for itself. I think that's probably not the case necessarily everywhere now. Maybe probably depends on the app, but I think it will get there. And kind of like this, kind of like the what did it take for solar power to get popular? It took like a
It took
bunch of people.
ridiculous utility bills.
Exactly that, and it took, solar panels getting affordable enough that homeowners could look at them and say, if I install this, yes, it's going to cost a lot of money, but it's pretty much sure thing. In 10 years, I'm going to have my money back. And I don't know what the equation is for big companies with respect to accessibility, but I think the cost goes down over the years, not only as the technology gets better for these kind of like having things like on the web standards that describe how to make things accessible didn't exist back when you were doing your HTML, I don't think.
No,
And
it didn't exist. Thank goodness, or I'd have been in jail over it. I mean,
so I mean, things the world is in this one way getting, I think, progressively better with each passing year. It's easier to make things accessible. There's more common knowledge that it's worthwhile. And I wanted to get at something from a developer point of view. This is especially true for if any developers are listening. There are payoffs to making things accessible in some cases that you won't appreciate until you go to some other aspect of your app and it shows through. And the main thing I'm thinking of is actually the way that VoiceOver, for example, forces a developer to think through the structure of their app actually can help you design a cleaner and more maintainable app. And that's because sometimes it's a tool that actually helps you examine the information hierarchy in your app. Because sometimes when you're looking at it, you're thinking, okay, well, what's it mean when like a VoiceOver user gets to this? Well, it means they want to, I don't know, send the blog to post to their blog. And sometimes you realize, well, that's not in the logical place. And it's looking at it from a different point of view. In my case, literally looking at it, for some people figuratively. And it's kind of like, it's just going to help you design your stuff. I think a perfectly designed app would be ready to go with accessible features from day one. And therefore, if you now go into new projects with accessibility in mind, it's gonna help guide a better design overall.
Right. So you've mentioned a couple of things there. One is something I talk about a lot, which is we have to be more vocal about how improving accessibility improves the user experience for everybody that doesn't have disabilities. That's like one of my key things. And then the second part was, I recently had my friend Alex Sanfilippo on here, who's the founder of Podmatch, and he said the exact same thing about code you just said, that once you get in the habit of creating code for accessibility, you create cleaner code, you create better hierarchies, you save yourself a lot of work when it comes time to update a piece of software or an app, or to add to it, or to come up with a totally new generation. And, while we all want to make more money, saving those hours, sometimes hundreds or thousands of hours, can add up to a nice big paycheck for a software developer.
That's true. Absolutely. And speaking of the hierarchy, one concrete example, I actually had a sort of a head start in some respects to making some of my apps accessible because I had already supported AppleScript. And
Okay.
AppleScript, in many ways, I don't know if you're familiar with it, if you've used it, in some ways, I should say, it sort of resembles the interaction hierarchy of VoiceOver.
Okay.
In that you have like an app as the top level element, and you sort of drill down into the app. And to be able to do that in a programmatic way requires the code of the app to be organized very much in a way that's kind of, comparable to how things are exposed to VoiceOver. So just to flip that around a little bit, you might go to the work of making your app accessible to VoiceOver, let's say. I'm talking about VoiceOver here because it's the most clear, like, kind of accessibility. It covers a lot of things.
Yes.
There's other accessible features people should look at, but this is a good starting point. And supporting VoiceOver, you might end up in a situation where it's easier to provide like automation tools to people. Now, for some apps that doesn't matter, but you can think of automation and scripting tools as kind of like another interface to your app. So if you've gone to the trouble of making a visual interface, and then you go to the trouble of making sure that the visual interface maps to like a information hierarchy, then you are in very good shape then to support a whole other interface, which is scripted programming interaction.
Right. And I'm assuming that last point you're talking about there is VoiceOver, which is screen reader or text to speech navigation.
Well, I wasn't specifically thinking of that. I was just thinking of the fact that, for instance, with AppleScript, um, I could say, make a new blog post, set the target blog to Red Sweater blog, put this text in it, and send it. And that has all happened without a person either looking at a screen or navigating a voiceover hierarchy.
Oh, okay.
So it's sort of like in a sense, it's another market. It's another niche market for your app. And I think that making your app, the power of your app available in many different interfaces, accessible interfaces are just one of those. But making it that way is just, again, like it helps unleash the power of whatever your code does. It's going to be more useful and more powerful the more ways people can leverage it.
Right. There used to be a market in JAWS for Windows scripts, and JAWS for Windows is obviously for Microsoft's operating system. But there used to be people who actually created scripts and sold scripts to JAWS users. And I kind of thought when Apple came out with Apple Script that something similar to that would happen for Apple users. And like you say, some people would develop full-blown pieces of software apps, but other people might simply develop scripts that allow people to interact at a different level in a different way, but that still helps them get to where they need to be going.
Yeah. Well, and then the latest thing, of course, Apple has this. To be honest, Apple has not been a good steward of AppleScript over the many years. Some of that might be AppleScript's fault, so to speak, because it had flaws that became evident. But some of it's just Apple hasn't given it the care that it needed. But now Apple is kind of focused on this new automation with the shortcuts. Shortcuts on iOS and shortcuts on Mac. It's a kind of a unified automation. And just to say, that's one more way that people can interact with an app. And to be honest, it's, again, has to have that like good design for information hierarchy. Once you have that, you can adapt it to all these different ways of using the app.
Right. So people can use the app directly if it's been created like yours have, where it's accessible. They can use shortcuts to accomplish the same tasks within existing apps, or to better use the apps that are available to them that maybe aren't as accessible as they would like them to be.
Right.
Kind of like when it comes to a podcast, most people will release their content. There'll be video, closed captions, audio, transcripts, and those various different forms that it goes out in give people of different learning styles and abilities a way to consume the same content.
Yep. Yeah, great. I mean, it's a great comparison, because you've got the value of the content it's there. It's not going to change. The value of the content is not going to change. It's just the number of people who can access it is going to change.
Right. And to go back to your example, the purpose, the function of the software is not going to change. It's just the access to it that's going to change. Am I following?
That's it. Exactly. That's it.
I tell you what, I've been working harder today than I have in a year, man.
You didn't know what you were getting into having me on the
No,
show.
I did not. But I don't know what I'm getting into 90% of the time. So
I didn't know what I was getting into with me either. That's how I wake up every morning.
So I love that you're willing to admit that. I mean, because for one of the things that I run into a lot is just the overwhelm. People that have good ideas or good intentions on addressing accessibility or improving features in general, they just think about it too much and they worry about it too hard and they don't do it. But you just got up in the morning or get up in the morning and do it. And I'm at the point in my career, I'll be 60 next year. I'm at the point where I have to tell myself no all the darn time, or I'll do a bunch of stuff that I don't have time to be doing.
Yeah, I haven't quite learned that yet, but maybe it'll accelerate as I get towards 60 as well. You do start to appreciate limited amount of time. It's too many things you could be doing. You got to focus on what's most important to you. And but I appreciate your sentiment about that, because I do have a tendency sometimes to be a perfectionist. But with accessibility, it's very clear. Sometimes I'll fix one accessible bug. I'll see something else that's wrong, and I'll say, well, I just can't fix that right now. But there's going to be somebody who runs into that one situation that I fixed, and it'll be better, you know?
Right. Well, just quickly here, we need to talk a little bit about accessibility as a process, because not just finding other things to fix, but breaking things as you fix things is a real issue with accessibility, is it not?
Well, I don't have a strong sense of the second part of what you said, the breaking things as you fix things. I guess I would only have that experience if fixing something really required a major upheaval of everything that's already there. A lot of times, what the fixes I have to do for stuff on the Mac, for example, are sort of self-contained. So, for example, in Mars Edit, there's a special field. I don't know if you've ever used it, but it's for featured image, and so it's like a custom little spot where you can drop a photo and
And it,
control
it
whether.
replaces the header image for the purposes of that blog post.
That's right. And so it's a completely custom little interface um, that I added to the app. And so it took me a while to realize there were some issues there with accessibility, and there may still be, but I could fix those at least in the little microcosm of that area of the window without risking anything else in the whole window. Now, sometimes maybe especially if the app hasn't been designed well for accessibility, maybe you do run into more of what you're alluding to, which is, oh, to fix this, I'm going to have to, rebuild the whole way that the accessibility hierarchy is constructed. Um, for people, I just mentioned a lot of people who aren't developers might not realize this. And one thing I found really interesting as a developer, learning to support accessible features, was the kind of breakthrough. Here's the major breakthrough for me as a developer that I don't know if everyone has thought about if you don't develop the actual code. A lot of making things accessible, at least for voiceover, is giving a description to what's on the screen. But some of it is removing descriptions from what's on the screen because it's irrelevant. And
Mhm.
some of it is making up stuff that's not on the screen because it's more relevant to somebody who's browsing the data, you know, with a screen reader. And so the idea that for me was a big breakthrough to realize not everything in the information hierarchy has to be visible or invisible to sighted users. In that way,
background.
in that way, you have that really drives home how the accessible interface is its own interface. A lot of it is in common with the visual interface, but you have the freedom, and I love that about the way Apple at least does it. Is every by default the accessible hierarchy of an app on the Mac, for example, everything that we would call a view, which is like a button, a text editing area, a label on something. I know you all know what those are. Anyone who uses VoiceOver, but those are all automatically accessible elements. But you can add any number of accessible elements to the hierarchy without any view necessarily being there. And I think that's kind of like a tool that developers need to keep in mind more often, because sometimes it'll be like, well, this was really designed for people who could see the complexity of it. An example might be like a pie chart. A pie chart is very specifically designed for a sighted person.
Yes.
Now, if I was to go implement that naively as an accessible app, it might be like, you know, voiceover crossing into pi wedge 38%, voiceover crossing into pi wedge 42%, voiceover still in pi wedge 42%, whatever. When it could just say three values, this is a list of three values making up 100%. And I don't know. I'm just going off on a tangent here,
No,
but that's
well, see, we appreciate tangents here. We encourage stories. One thing about the podcast is I'm never upset if my guests answer say a better question than I asked. So, and that's one of the great things about hosting a podcast for yourself as opposed to hosting it for an organization or a company is that if I feel like you're saying something that we need to explore more, I can do that.
yeah.
I don't have to worry about the script. Not that I had one, but I don't have to worry about it. So I appreciate everything You've been trying to help my audience understand today about developing more accessible software and apps, and especially the part about how designing for accessibility is definitely designing for everybody and improving the lives of all your potential users. So, but before I give you a couple minutes to send us out with, I just want to thank you for one other thing, and that is I grew up doing crosswords
Oh
with
yeah.
with my grandmother and my mom. Back whenever we were at home during the winter, we had a Scrabble board. Black ink is one of those things that you just can't underestimate the value of it on a social level, on an emotional level, to people who have this outlet to continue doing something that they've been doing a long time that they thought they were going to have to quit doing because of their vision loss. So I just wanted to make sure that I got it in just how much I appreciate what you did with Black Ink, because it couldn't have been an easy project to manage, even using the iOS approach to it. And again, I want to make sure you know how I feel, and I believe how many others out there feel about it.
I love to hear that. As I said, I love the feedback, and it's easy for me not really being in a position to use the app in that way. I mean, I try. I know more about VoiceOver as a user than most sighted people because I'm always going through trying to do it. But I don't have a good sense at the end of the day for, does this actually get the job done completely? Because it's really easy to cheat and open my eyes, you know. So it's really great to hear when things are working. And I know, I have a list of bugs and accessibility for Black Ink because it is challenging. The idea of a two-dimensional grid with like a depth of information at the word and then the cell level, it's confusing. And Apple didn't really design anything to make that easy to expose. So if I'm doing a decent job at it, I love it. And anybody who uses it, please don't hesitate to let me know what I could do better. I'm gonna try. It's some of it. I feel like I just reached the limits of the screen reader, but what I've tried to lean towards more and more is, don't be afraid to just be more verbose, because I know a lot of people who use the screen readers use like the really fast speech, and it can you'll pick it all up. But it's great to hear, and especially the family connection aspect of it. I mean, everybody can relate to that. There's things that you did with your family, they're important to you, and the idea, I think you nailed it. The idea of thinking you're going to lose those forever and then discovering that maybe you're not is got to be a great feeling.
Yes, it is. So if you could take a minute or so and share some final thoughts with those people out there, both developers and users of software, so that we can improve and have even more accessible things available to us.
Well, the first thing I would say, I guess I'm imagining there's very few developers listening to this, but there's probably some. It's not like some of my other podcasts I'm on. It's basically all developers, right? And
Right.
so I would probably start by saying, getting back to what you were bringing up earlier about the wanting to get in touch with developers, your frustration about how sometimes you get in touch with a developer and it feels like they're not listening at all about the accessibility issues. But the main thing being, I said earlier, like, get in touch and tell developers what they're doing right. That obviously is helpful, but you've got to let these developers know that there's something that's not accessible about their apps. And sometimes you'll get a receptive ear, and probably many times you won't, but then the message.
Uh-oh.
Edit live stream button.
Hello? Well, it seems like I have lost Daniel, but I do think he was on the right track. We have to tell people that are developers we like what they're doing as much as when we tell them the things we think they need to be fixing. And I know that I'm going to do my best to continue to introduce people like Daniel to my audience and also to others I know on the development side, so that we can continue spreading the word, the thought, the approach to accessibility as a core part of universal design. Y'all can check out Daniel Jalcut's website, redsweater.com. If you whether or not you need the apps, maybe you know somebody who does, who would benefit from them. I believe pretty much any person that has a blog nowadays or website that is running on a CMS could definitely benefit from his Mars Edit. I really enjoyed getting to speak to Jason after using his product for many years, and looking forward to getting to talk to him finally today. So that has been really cool. Again, his website is redsweater.com. And now, as for me, I am the blind blogger Maxwell Ivy. I've been educating people about accessibility for almost 2 decades now. I'm available to write, speak, or consult on the subject of accessibility. I'm a motivational as well as informational speaker. And as you can tell from my podcast, I come with lots of life experience and entertaining stories to bring home the points that I will share with your audience. So I do hope you'll reach out to me. I especially love helping small businesses, software as a service businesses, improve accessibility. One, because it can help so many people with disabilities, but 2, it can give that website owner, that business owner, a competitive advantage that allows them to have an edge over some of the bigger companies with deeper pockets. So I hope you'll check me out at the accessibilityadvantage.com. Send me an email, maxwell@theaccessibilityadvantage.com, or go to LinkedIn. I'm Maxwell Ivy over there. IV is in Victor, EY. I do appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I hope you'll join me next time I have another great conversation on the Accessibility Advantage. Disabled people, we tell our friends and share to our social sites. Don't think about how hard it is. Just focus on those $signs. 'Cause accessibility ain't just for those with disabilities. Makes the world better for everyone.
Item chooser menu. One item end stream button. End stream button.
Online as
End the
well
stream and
as
5 more
in
items. Dial Alt
person.
set not end stream button.